Hey everybody, Jimmy here with Instructor Corey, and that means we're talking about some long-range related stuff. Specifically, the thing everybody loves to talk about, the guns themselves. Now we've got a few, if you're watching here on YouTube, we've got a few rifles over our shoulders here on the table. They're going to be used as reference in this. And the big thing we want to discuss here is that not all long-range rifles are created equal. I think that Corey can go into this. Each of these rifles here on the table are perfectly capable of executing a long-range shot, but I think we need to maybe further define or something like that for those of you out there who are maybe shopping for a rifle or considering using a certain rifle that you have for a certain application. You know, long-range shooting, I'll put that in quotes, Corey, it can mean different things to different people. You know, one of these up here, I think it's, if you're watching, it can be probably pretty obvious. One of them might be perfectly fine for taking a reasonably long shot at game in a hunting scenario. And one of them might be a better choice if you're going to be doing something at a higher round count, like taking one of our long-range classes,
right,
or going to a PRS match, or something else. Just shooting for fun, but shooting relatively higher round counts. So, Corey, how did this topic come up?
Well, so obviously I'm a long-range shooting instructor, and we get to see patterns and kind of students that show up with certain equipment. And we find that students, sometimes they show up with rifles such as the black one up there, which looks a lot like a traditional hunting rifle. I'm sure a lot of you have those in your gun safes at home. And we get students to show up and they're like, well, I have this gun and it shoots, you know, a caliber. It's a high-powered cartridge, and I think I can shoot long range with it, and I just want to try it out. So they do show up with equipment like that. And we see them oftentimes, not every time, but oftentimes struggle. And we just wanted to kind of clear up some reasons why that might be, and what exactly to look for to help kind of mitigate that and help people make better decisions as far as equipment selection goes. But some people do just like to, you know, bring their hunting rifle out and see what they can do, which is fine too. But just knowing what you have is kind of how it came about, and knowing what to expect.
Yeah, you can absolutely come out and shoot one of those long-range classes. Like I said, I think what we're looking at there, one of the biggest things is that you're going to be shooting all day. You know, in a hunting scenario,
right,
hopefully you really only end up shooting once, maybe twice or something like that.
Right.
But this, you're going to be shooting all day. You're going to be taking in a lot of information. And some of these rifles, they can either be quite fatiguing to shoot all day, or maybe they're just not built to shoot that much in that short period of time or something like that. I think, again, you know, not to discourage people on a certain rifle that they have, it may be really accurate, but if you shoot it 3 to 5 times, you know, you can
right,
shoot sub-M away, and then we kind of see things open up, which is kind of a weird concept for some people. I think especially if you have only used a rifle in a hunting scenario before, it is one that you've only shot. You shoot it a couple times, confirm your zero, make a click here and there, and then, you know, again, it goes out in the woods and maybe takes 1 or 2 shots.
Right.
And these are things now that they're just finally learning about the gun setups. So, Corey, take us through kind of, I feel like the best way to start with this might be, what is it about that traditional hunting rifle? What is it? I named a few things, but just real quick there, we'll go more in depth on it. What is it about this particular rifle that makes it, or this style, that makes it less ideal for, you know, a long-range class or a PRS match or something like that?
Yeah, so there's a few things with it. I think the main thing, though, what I'm kind of drawn to, and I think other precision rifle shooters or long-range shooters are drawn to, is we immediately look at the barrel profile. So you can see, and everybody on camera can see, that the rifle below has a much thicker profile barrel versus the top rifle is much thinner. And the thinner profile barrel is not going to be as conducive to accuracy over, you know, a bunch of shots. So if we're taking 5, 10, maybe 15 shots, we very well could see the group start to open up. Just because that barrel is not as rigid, it's not as stiff as the one on the bottom. It's not as thick. And that metal is going to heat up a lot more quickly than this profile on the bottom. Just because it's thinner, and metal, when it heats up, becomes more malleable, and we could start to see stringing and things like that. So that's one of the main things about that top rifle that kind of makes it, you know, somewhat unsuitable for a long-range shooting course like we do here.
Yeah. It's a bizarre phenomena, what you're describing there, too. I mean, just to think about a barrel heating up and causing inaccuracies. But We see it all the time, like you said, with stringing or some of these other phrases or just phenomena that you'll see with people. Sometimes a gun will start to heat up and you'll start to see the group almost begin to walk itself off of a target. And that could be, I believe that what happens when they go through the process of making these barrels is that sometimes there's minor inconsistencies in the metallurgy that cause the barrel to kind of take the path of least resistance as it's expanding. And it'll start to actually sort of, somewhat microscopically, if you will, kind of curve off to one side or kind of deflect a little.
Or those imperfections could get exposed more because when we shoot, we have something called barrel whip, which is where the harmonics and all that, our barrels actually, there's very quick vibrations and things going on. If you think of like a guitar string, almost just very quick, and the barrel goes through a few motions, it's called barrel whip. And that's where the term harmonics, the barrel's harmonics and things come from. So that could get exposed more when the barrel starts to heat up.
Yeah.
And then that's where we see those groups open up and that stringing and things like that.
For sure.
So another characteristic about that top rifle, though, other than the barrel profile, is just so the folks at home know, this top one is a 7mm Rem mag. And it's probably 5 to 6 pounds total rifle weight.
Okay.
So that alone, just with that in mind, there's going to be a lot more recoil, right? And, I know a lot of the guys that come out are grown men, we do get women to come out too, but a lot of them are grown men, think they can handle that recoil, which I'm sure they can, but it does affect you. We're all human beings and we start to feel it after, I start to feel it when I'm shooting that rifle after 3 or 4 shots. And that will play into how we can actually group in our accuracy on target. Maybe we're flinching or anticipating a shot because we know this thing's about to, recoil really hard into our shoulder, so we want to fight against it. Yeah. So that becomes an issue, too, when we see these rifles show up to these courses.
It does. That's such an interesting one because, even if you mentioned the whole, it can be a bit of a macho thing sometimes, right? When you're talking about a big caliber and of course it's in a lightweight gun, which is funny because if you're talking macho, you're like also shedding pounds because you want to be as lightweight. Anyway, it can be a bit contradictory. But in those particular rifles, it's not always necessarily that you start to become afraid of the rifle. I don't think that's what we're saying, and I don't think that's what anybody thinks. But after a while, if you're consciously having to think about the recoil, that's if we all work with 100% consciousness and it starts to get eaten up by other things other than concentrating on the shot, the fundamentals of marksmanship, what our wind is, and all that other stuff. If we can't dedicate 100% of our consciousness to that product and some of it's being diverted away to thinking about, okay, not to mention, once this gun goes off, it's going to buck me pretty good, you know. As soon as you start thinking about that stuff, you're losing some bit of thought process that can go into the actual shot. Right. And that's where you see all the time. You see PRS competitors who are shooting a pretty significant round count, all having to stay very precise and shooting at long ranges. They're usually shooting the little 6mm out of like a 20-pound gun. Yeah. And they're trying to mitigate that as much as possible so that it isn't something they have to think about.
Right. And weight is good when it comes to precision rifle and long-range shooting. Like a heavier gun is better. Helps us with stability and from shot to shot, being able to spot our own impacts and things like that. But it is application-based, too, depending on what the person wants to do with the rifle.
Right. Just like it's easier for you to flick a ping pong ball across a table than it is to flick a shot put thing across the table with the same amount of input. It's very easy for a big caliber to move this gun back at your shoulder at a pretty rapid rate than it is to move this larger gun. So
right. And just a final note on that top one, why it's not necessarily the best thing to show up to a long-range course with, is just we need some adjustability back here on the stocks. The two main ones are this piece right here, where our face actually connects to the rifle. That's called the comb height adjustment. And then also back here, I don't know if they can see it or not, but some spacers can be put in and taken out of this stock to allow me to lengthen it or to shorten it. And I don't have those options on that traditional type of hunting rifle. So I'm stuck with what I have, unless if I can get some kind of aftermarket thing, which there's very little opportunities to do that out there. Not many things like that exist. So I'm kind of stuck with what I have. So unless if that gun perfectly fits me, which doubtful,
Yeah.
I'm always going to be fighting it to some degree or doing something to strain or crowd the rifle, and I can't perfectly fit that to me as a person. And that's an important part to the long-range shooting. So it's not impossible to make a good shot without those adjustments. It just makes our job a little bit harder, and it would be a lot better if we just could jump on the rifle and everything is right there, ready to go for us.
Because that reduces muscle tension, which you guys talk about all the time, and it doesn't necessarily, again, mean, I feel like I'm having to explain things to the macho folks out there. So, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, this gun is so heavy I can't lift it. But it literally means muscle tension. Anything that you have to do to manipulate the gun is potential for inaccuracies and inconsistencies, right?
Right, and it falls into elements of a good shooting position. There's 3 of them: bone support, muscular relaxation, so that's what we're kind of talking about now, and then that leads to natural point of aim. But yeah, if we can't achieve that muscular relaxation, then we're fighting our equipment, and that's not a good place to be.
Yeah.
So,
what before we move on to talking about this, the larger barrel profile gun with the adjustments, things like that, before we talk about that, what do you recommend for somebody, or how do you approach? This is your own gun, right? The 7mm here.
Yep.
How do you approach using that yourself when you are in, a hunting scenario and you still need to execute a really accurate shot? Like, how much do you train with this rifle and being accurate with it and, understanding how it functions and what, obviously you got to get dope on it and get data on it and things like that. How do you go about doing that and really working the fundamentals while also not dealing with, like, what? It's very frustrating when you're trying to get good data on a rifle, you're trying to zero it and you're trying to do whatever it is, but if it's got a real thin barrel profile and now all of a sudden, okay, I'm always having to wait for it to cool down,
right?
Or this thing's really kicking me like crazy and my shoulder's starting to hurt and I'm starting to anticipate that recoil a lot, but I'm only 10 rounds into quote practicing or training with this thing. Like, how do you balance that?
Right. So you kind of hit on it a little bit there, but just because it is a lighter rifle and shoots a Magnum cartridge, it is hard on the shoulder.
Yeah.
And I also, half the battle is just knowing what you have, knowing your equipment. So, now the folks at home are starting to learn, if you do have a rifle like this, we can't just sit and plug away, 10, 15 rounds and expect any sort of accuracy or confidence in what we're seeing. So I do take that into account, knowing my equipment. If I want to go and say shoot at a 500-yard target and gather information on that, I will take my first few shots. I'll see where I'm impacting, see the elevation, and then record that if I need to, and then I'll give the gun a rest, right? Just give it time to cool down, because those thin profile barrels, especially shooting those faster cartridges, they'll heat up pretty quick.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I give it adequate time to kind of cool down, so that I'm not, my information that I'm collecting, my elevation that I need to be at to hit 500, it's not construed somehow by imperfection in the equipment or kind of like a shortcoming with it. So I think half the battle is just knowing what you have and knowing what it's capable of, and trying to stay within those confines, right? And I don't necessarily, I have in my head, a certain distance where I could confidently take a shot at a certain size target, and I'm okay with that. I know the equipment's capable of it. I know I'm capable of doing it, but I wouldn't go, past a certain distance. Maybe, with that gun, I would say 500 plus. I'd probably just leave it alone, just because the gun is not necessarily designed, to a higher degree for accuracy purposes. It's designed for a different application.
And that's always gun and shooter dependent too.
Yeah,
I think that's important to mention, because you hear people out there, sometimes they get an idea and they're like, oh yeah, well, I can't shoot a deer beyond 400 yards. It's like, okay, well, where'd you get that number? I don't know. I heard someone else say it. It's like, oh, well, you got a different gun than them. You're in a different location than them, different game, different shooter yourself,
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just for your reference out there. How about, again, just real quick on this, because I think so many people are in this situation, but like, say you then get somebody, now they go out and get 2 guns. That's always the answer. Get more guns. You get something like this. This is a great gun, I think, to train with, shoot a lot of long range with, go out, shoot competition with. And when I'm pointing at, for those who are only listening, is the gun that's very obviously a larger profile, heavier gun, all that stuff. Chambered in
308 Winchester.
308. Okay,
Yep.
got it. You didn't go the common route, and it's something that starts with 6. But training with this, is that going to set you up poorly, I would say, to go and then shoot something like the 7mm here with the recoil? You know, like, are you lulling yourself to some sort of a degree of comfort where you're like, oh, yeah, every gun I shoot is nice and easy. And then you pull this gun out and you're like, oh, I wasn't ready for that. And you know, like, is there any issue there?
I would say maybe there could be an issue there. But I would say as long as the person is educated and they know what to expect and from their certain equipment, their platform, I would say that they could definitely, you know, go from a gun like this, shooting a gun like this consistently, and then jumping over to something like that and understanding like, okay, this is what I have now, and these are the things that I need to pay attention to in order to make a good shot on target. I think that just knowing the things to look for. And some of the stuff I'm talking about too is like, so this is a heavier gun, shoots a 308 Winchester. It's roughly 20 pounds or so. So a lot lighter on the recoil than that top one. So it is nicer to shoot. I don't have a muzzle brake on it. So I do jump off target a little bit, just given that. But the recoil is much nicer than that 7 mag. So I don't have to worry about that. The trigger is about 2.5 pounds. So it's a nicer trigger to shoot.
That's another point too. Yeah, the trigger.
And the gun is fitted to me. I have these adjustments back here. So I do shoot this a lot. This is kind of like my training gun. And if I jump onto that rifle right there, it's a lighter rifle. I might have to do a couple of things differently. One of them, I need to make sure that my field of view is good. Since I can't fit that rifle to my body, if I just snug right into it, I'm probably going to get some scope shadow there. So I might have to move my head in a different way that I wouldn't with this rifle in order to achieve good eye relief and a good sight picture. So that's one of them. And another one is the top rifle. That hunting rifle has about 5.6 pound trigger pull, which is pretty significant. That's a tough one to work with. So yeah, I have to check to make sure I'm not unsafe sometimes.
I can see that.
It's so just knowing that, I need to know that about that gun though in order to make a good shot on target with that rifle. And it's still hard, though, because it is a lighter rifle and I'm shooting a 7mm mag. So, you know, I try to just deal with the recoil and allow the rifle to go off, you know, as much as I can. But a big thing is just the trigger control, right? That 5.6 pound trigger pull. It's very easy to come off target, especially if I'm in a somewhat unstable position. So it really comes down to just knowing your equipment. And knowing how to work with it, right? Right.
Yeah, and something you mentioned there too. I mean, you were talking about. I think it was involving the trigger. Sometimes this happens in podcasting, ladies and gentlemen, where you just completely forget what you were going to say. But no, those are all really good points. And you know, the hunting rifle. I think it was in regards to. Well, I can speak from experience where you're talking about how the rifle's not always perfectly fitted to you. And, you know, you may have to find your spot or make your own spot behind the scope to make sure that your sight picture is right. You got the right field of view. You're not getting scope shadow. I can speak from experience and say, I know one time myself kind of transferring between rifles, I found myself behind a lightweight, just 6.5 Creedmoor, not something that people would consider a super high recoiling round or anything like that, but it was in a really lightweight rifle. And I had gotten used to shooting all these big, you know, 15, 20-pound guns and little 6mm cartridges and things like that. And pretty much, you know, you basically can just set the gun somewhere and bring your finger up, pull the trigger, and it's not even going to recoil enough to fall off of the bag it's sitting on.
Right, yeah.
And I just wasn't thinking, and I got set up on a target, and I could actually see the target in the scope real well. But in the way that I had it, the stock wasn't against my shoulder. It was kind of against my bicep almost because I was having to transition between targets. It was kind of a mess of a situation. I was on the clock, yada, yada. And I'm like, okay, I can see the target. Doesn't matter wherever the rifle is. I can just shoot it because I know. And I thought so. And I ended up getting scope-eyed. And that's with a scope that had, you know, 4.2 inches of eye relief, which is plenty, very forgiving eye relief. But because I had gotten so lazy with where I put the scope or where I put the rifle in my shoulder pocket, then I wound up having that issue. But,
right. And that's a good point too, is just for safety concern, is those lighter rifles, especially the ones shooting the Magnum cartridges, like they can come back, especially if you don't have the opportunity to adjust the length of pull, that stock, like you could very easily nick yourself in the eyebrow there. And
that's what happened to me. And like I said, with just a 6.5 Creedmoor.
Yeah.
So it had enough. And then the trigger thing too, that was what I was going to bring up too. It never hurts to dry fire a trigger when you're switching between guns, just to remember where you're at and which gun you got there, which trigger.
Yep, kind of creating that relationship with your equipment. Like, okay, now I know what to expect. I've dry fired this a few times, and then we can get behind the gun and load it and see how we do.
Mm-hmm. How about, all right, talk about, we've alluded to it plenty of times now, but the 308 sitting here, the big 20-pound behemoth, it actually doesn't look like 20 pounds when you're looking at it, but I've picked this gun up before. It is indeed all of 20 pounds. I wouldn't be shocked if it was even over. Talk about what's going on with this gun that makes it such a great trainer. This is one that you would absolutely, I know you would take right through one of our long-range classes, a couple days long perhaps even, of training. And what it is about this thing.
Okay. Yeah. So just kind of the opposite of what we were talking about up there. So I have a heavier barrel. So right off the bat, I have some rigidity and stiffness. That's going to allow me to produce accurate groups on target. The barrel is not going to heat up as quickly, right? Mm-hmm. So it's going to heat up more slowly. And then when it does heat up, it's going to cool down more quickly, right? So I can actually, do those 10, 15 shot groups, and I'm fine. Like, that barrel's going to cool down in no time flat, and I'm still ready to go. So definitely a point right there. Also, the barrel is free-floated.
So, yeah, good point.
So all those barrel harmonics we talked about when we fire, we get some, vibrations and certain movements from the barrel. And we would just want that to operate freely. We don't want anything touching it to mess up those harmonics in any way. We just want it to operate, the way it should. So what you'll find on long-range guns is it's free-floated from this point all the way forward, right? There's nothing touching
right where it meets the receiver all the way to the end.
Yep. And that one is not free-floated. So typical, unless if it's advertised for a traditional type hunting rifle, you can probably expect them not to be free-floated.
Yeah.
And I think it's something the manufacturers are throwing out there for people because they know the importance of it now for the most part.
Well, and sometimes, working range here, we got an air compressor running in the background if you can hear that. But anyway, sometimes too with these hunting rifles, maybe it's even a free-floated barrel, but the stock they have on it can tend to be so thin, and they're trying to achieve that light weight, it becomes a bit, it's prone to flex. And so if you have a bipod on it, I found that pressing in and loading your bipod a bit will make this stock come up, and right there, I'm just doing it.
You even did it right there.
Yeah, and now the barrel is no longer free-floated, and so just the way that you load the gun will all of a sudden start to produce different results.
Right. And along with that, too, you talk about loading the bipod. So there's another point for this one is the weight, like we talked about before, is, it settles. The gun settles very nicely versus this top rifle, 5 or 6 pounds. It doesn't settle as easily. So when I'm behind the rifle trying to get a good sight picture and get on target, things are shifting pretty easily, and it wants to move around a lot more freely than this heavier gun down here on the bottom. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And I would say along with weight, when people think about, okay, I want to go shoot long range, I'm going to look for, a cartridge, they tend to try to go all out and get like those bigger Magnum cartridges. I want a bullet that can actually reach those targets.
No holdover, 1,000 yards.
Yeah, and I would say something like that. And I would say if that's their strategy, if you are going to get that 300 Win Mag, I would make an argument for trying to get a heavier gun, proportionate to the power that cartridge is going to produce. To try to get it to settle. It's not going to recoil into your shoulder as much. It's going to allow it to operate a lot more fluidly. Than some, this is a 308 and it's about 20 pounds. So it tends to work pretty well in that manner.
It's always very nerve-wracking when you see someone come in and they're just like, yeah, I got this 450 lot and this gun weighs 5.5 pounds. And you're like, ooh.
Yeah.
Like you're about to get...
Bringing the 3378 here. Yeah.
Anyway, I've distracted myself entirely even just thinking about it. But yeah, these are all very good points.
Yeah, and then we mentioned it a little bit earlier too, but just kind of moving back on the rifle. The trigger. I think that's one of the more important ones because when I go from this rifle to that rifle, I feel the weight, I feel the difference there. But when I go to press the trigger, I can feel like there is a huge deviation in performance there.
Yeah.
So even, 2.5 is probably considered a little on the heavy side for precision rifle shooters now. But I like it. I think it's a good weight. But having a good trigger is important. It is definitely important.
I'll throw one out there, Corey. You've got on the more hunting rifle, this is a very common thing, just where the rounds go in. You have an internal magazine there, it appears, right? So, again, just in terms of, these are little things, right, that can just make your training session or a long-range class easier. This gun maybe holds, probably like 4 rounds?
3 to 4.
3 to 4?
I forget. Yeah.
Something like that. And so, you're either going to be sled loading a lot or you're going to be stuffing rounds down in there all the time. That just gets kind of tedious, really. Right. And other folks are going to be able to maybe, if they have one like this gun, the 308 here, this has a detachable box magazine, I see. So you may be able to get a magazine that's got 10, heck, 15, 20 rounds if you're really feeling ambitious. But even a 10-round magazine, it can make going through a certain drill a lot easier, or just, hey, I'm working on something, I want to have a follow-up shot before the wind changes, or I want to do something here real quick, and nope, I have to sled load another round in with this gun, whereas with this guy, I've got another few on tap.
That's a good point, too. And along with that, I would say probably the most important part with what you were just talking about is with long-range shooting, we like consistency, so we like to keep our head on the gun. We like to keep our body in the same position from shot to shot. And if we constantly have to top load around, we're kind of making those extraneous movements. That might compromise our position and cause, variation or in our group, or maybe just not to be as accurate as we could be when we constantly have to do something like that.
I didn't even think about that. I'm just thinking of being lazy. You're thinking of really precision stuff here.
Yeah. But then, and then the obvious ones I pointed out back here, right? But before I get back here, I want to point this one out because this is the one I notice a lot too, is in the back. Hopefully they can see it, but it's a traditional swept stock, kind of like an angled stock backwards, right where you're supposed to grip right there. And up here, it's more of a vertical.
This is more like a pistol grip.
Yep.
Just about.
And we get this kind of vertical angle here. And this allows us to kind of position our hand on the rifle in a favorable position to get us straight into the rear trigger press. So they'll probably see if people have been following precision rifle shooters or see pictures of their guns or things like that, they'll notice those vertical grips that the competitors and maybe military snipers use on their guns. And that just allows for a better grip on the gun and us to actually pull the trigger straight into the rear. And just good angles. Everything is ergonomic and kind of working in our favor there.
Right.
We're able to hold the gun into our shoulder. And it's not, with the swept stock, it's kind of, I'm angling my wrist like this.
Right.
And then if I try to press my trigger straight into the rear, it's kind of like an upward, forcing me upwards, or I have to make some weird compensation for it.
If you pointed at something over there, you'd point with your hand vertically oriented and your index finger. You wouldn't point at it like that.
Yeah.
It feels funny.
So, and it does. It's definitely something you feel, because I've shot guns with the vertical grip for a long time, and then going back to the hunting rifle, I'm like, wow, this is not ergonomic, and this is a little bit weird. So it's tougher in that aspect for sure.
Yeah.
So, and then just those common adjustments back here, the comb height that I mentioned before, and then the length of pull for my stock. Being able to fit that gun to me. We're all built differently, and it's important to set the gun up for you specifically if you're going to be on it, or me. All right, we just want to be right where we need to be right when we get on the gun.
Yeah.
So
just for fun, this is an entire different podcast. I mean, that we'll probably get into, I think. But of course, the optic. Now, Corey is, he's a long range guy, so even on his hunting rifle, he's got exposed turrets. But we'll see folks who come in with their hunting rifle, and they're like, I want to see again, like you said, what this thing can do. But not only is the rifle kind of a limiting factor, but they've got Dad's old 3-9 on it. Doesn't have a lot of magnification. It's got capped turrets that they're having to screw off and deal with, and they were never really designed to be dialed a whole lot. They've got a simple duplex crosshair reticle in there instead of something with more information in it. There's these things all start to add up as well. And like I said, the optics are something we could go into a whole nother 40 minutes on. But.
Absolutely. And I will mention one thing on the optics though, and it's just the a part of the optics, and that's the scope base. So on a long-range rifle, you'll typically see scope bases have 0 MOA cant, which is this rail system is just straight across, no cant built into it. And you'll find 20 MOA, 30 MOA, even 40 MOA sometimes. And what that means is that this rail actually has bias built into it. This is a 30 MOA biased rail, and it's actually angled downward slightly. And that's pretty common, or used to be pretty common on long-range rifles. Our cartridges are pretty efficient now, so sometimes we don't even really need bias built into it.
Right, you do because you're shooting an ancient cartridge like the 308.
Right, yeah, that's exactly. So, but it's important, and sometimes, if we're shooting a less efficient cartridge, we do need a little bit more juice out of our optics, and that's what that does is that 30 MOA kind of gets tacked on to the elevation that exists inside my optic. Mm-hmm. So if I were to slap this on my gun for the very first time and go zero it, I would probably have to dial down about 30 MOA in order to zero it. And when I dial down, that's freeing up all the upward elevation that I might need to hit those longer range targets.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Again, even something we can probably talk further on in the future. If you guys hear topics, just that we sort of even maybe breeze over, you're like, hey, talk more about that. We can hit it, bring it to you in a future episode. One last thing I was going to ask, Corey, and this is something that I don't always think is absolutely necessary nowadays, because I see that the factory options in guns that people can get are so good. But this 308 here, I believe you had custom built, correct?
Yes.
Whereas the 7 Red Mag up there is a factory gun.
Yes.
And I see so many factory guns shoot amazing. So this isn't a whole thing where it's like factory guns can't shoot as well.
Right.
But precision guns that shoot high round counts at long range, do all this stuff. The guns you're seeing most guys shoot in PRS, there's plenty of factory guns doing it. But the way that the barrel is mated to the receiver, the way that the receiver is mated to the stock, the way everything is put together in this case is just done such that it's so much less likely to start to encounter issues with inconsistencies as things start to heat up or as things get a little beat up. I'm sure you've got a really high quality barrel here, whereas the factory barrel on a traditional hunting rifle, it's made in mass production.
Right.
And it's just kind of, they basically reach into a bin full of barrels and they reach into a bin full of receivers, connect them together in a lot of cases, and then it's on its way. And so this gun just in and of itself is more likely to be, when you sight it in 100 yards, more likely to be maybe a half-minute gun.
Right.
Whereas your typical hunting setup with a lot of the ammo that I think people feed through hunting rifles might be a 1, maybe 2 MOA gun. It's
Right.
hard to say.
Yeah.
And so these are just held to stricter standards.
Yeah, definitely. And if people are looking to go the factory route, I would say at a minimum, try to get a guarantee with that. See if they have a guarantee on the rifle that they're producing. So if they're saying like, hey, we have this rifle, I would want some sort of accuracy guarantee. Is it, we guarantee this rifle will shoot 1 minute of angle or better, right? And that makes me feel a little bit better. I have something to hold them to and I'll look for in that aspect. But yeah, I would definitely, at a minimum for the factory route, look for a guarantee. And even the custom route too, I like guarantees, but they're riding on their reputation, so they're less likely to, just flub a gun out and give it to you. So.
Right. It's always a game of trade-offs with rifles. I mean, the perfect bolt-action rifle, in case you've just been listening this whole time, we've been talking about bolt-action rifles. I figured that would be obvious enough. But the perfect bolt-action rifle, the perfect rifle, it just doesn't exist, Because you think to yourself, okay, well, I want to do both long-range hunting and shooting. You can't with one gun. You absolutely can. Like this gun here that you have, this 20-pound 308 gun.
Right.
You can take it hunting.
Yeah.
There's nothing saying that you can't. It's just that it's quite heavy. And so you're like, all right, well, I want to make it lighter weight, but I want to retain all the qualities that it has now. It's like, well, you're probably going to do that by getting a thinner barrel, so you're going to lose some of the qualities that it currently has. And maybe you got to get a different stock that's lighter weight, so you might lose some of the qualities there in order to make it swing more, the pendulum more over to that hunting side. So then,
Right.
you're like, well, maybe I'll just take this hunting rifle to start and beef it up a little bit. Well, it's like, it's probably going to get heavier. It's probably going to get a little bit bigger. You might have things that you're adjusting that are sticking up off the gun. You might need to get a bigger, heavier optic. I like the simple crosshair. Well, now the optic's got a more complex reticle. It's so hard. You can find a gun that, you just live with. You're like, yeah, I realize it's not super lightweight, but I can hunt with it and it does great at the range. But then you just have to realize that you're compromising.
Right.
That's kind of the thing.
Yeah, and that's really trying to strike that balance is hard. Because I've thought about it, and I'm like, what would be the perfect gun? And trying to really drill down and find one it's really difficult, and it's hard to find an answer that doesn't involve like maybe purchasing a factory rifle and taking something off of it and putting something on it, and things like that. So, striking that balance isn't the easiest thing. So I think there has to be a compromise somewhere with weight, versus accuracy, depending on what the person wants to do.
Yep.
And I would say whatever they want to do more, if they're going to use it for hunting, but they're going to shoot long range recreationally a lot with it, well, maybe just set it up for the recreational shooting long range, and then you can take it hunting too as like an afterthought.
Right.
Or vice versa. So.
And in that case, there's the old classic saying, just do more push-ups if it's heavier. You know what I mean? Or you might just have to realize that your hunts may be tailored around you not being as mobile. I don't know.
And that's the conclusion we come to.
There we go. If you learned anything from Corey, he's going to be really upset with me off camera that all we ended on was do more push-ups. Yeah. That's not where you were going, I think, Corey. What you said before, you just don't pay attention to anything I said after Corey. We'll just pretend like you stopped there. But this is all good stuff. And I certainly think if any of you guys have questions about rifle setups, that's the whole thing. If you're coming to take a long range class, depending on when this podcast is released, I know that we're here in Wisconsin, and so it gets cold in the winter, so we have a bit of a lull. But if you're taking a long range class anywhere and you just have a question, you can always talk to your friendly friends at Vortex Edge. Hit us up, talk to us about it. Hit us up in the comments, Instagram, all that good stuff, because we're always happy to talk guns.
Yeah.
And it's never wrong to go and get more than one gun. It isn't. Your significant other, you can always just say it's their gun, the second one.
I would agree with that.
Right, yeah. Oh, it's the wife's gun. Yeah. Or the husband's gun, for that matter. It's 2022. We have to be equal opportunity. We're recording this in 22 at least. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Corey?
No, I think that was pretty thorough. And like Jimmy said, if you have questions, reach out. We're more than happy to answer them. We love this stuff. So
cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you on the next one. That's a wrap, everybody. Hope you liked this topic. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and of course, subscribe right here because there's going to be plenty more to come. If there's topics you'd like to hear us go over on the Vortex Edge podcast in the future, you can let us know by commenting below or hitting us up on Instagram, which is @Vortex Edge. We'd love to hear your suggestions so we can be bringing you the kind of episodes and topics that you want to hear. Otherwise, we'll be seeing you on a future episode. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Bye.